All righty, guys. So let's get into it. So, yeah, I want to talk about some of my favorite rosters in the NFL. Miami Dolphins, certainly one of my favorite rosters. Chop Robinson, I really like that pick. I think a lot of guys have really hammered this point home when it comes to Chop Robinson. Is this guy is just going to be a relentless force rushing the passer. He's going to give them that needed depth they needed depth to really keep that rotation. You look at they just ran out of edge rushers at the end of the season. A lot of people talked about this. No Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips. So yeah, you add in Chop Robinson. You got a rotation of edge rushers. It's legit. I mean, looking at the Miami Dolphins roster, Jordan Brooks has been pretty good. I'm surprised Seattle didn't sign him. You know, there's not a lot of elite linebackers in the NFL if you really look at it. Outside of Fred Warner, you could argue even Demario Davis. Demario Davis kind of like the number two. Other than Fred Warner, there's just not a lot of elite linebackers. And yeah, Jordan Brooks he's not an elite linebacker, but you argue he's a good linebacker. So yeah, I mean, you look at the Miami Dolphins, it could be more sizzle than steak with the Miami Dolphins roster, but there's a lot of big notable names: Tyreek Hill, Jalen Ramsey, Javon Holland. Kendall Fuller's been a nice player. Notable years in Washington. David Long at linebacker. Deshaun Hand, a guy that's kind of hung around the NFL. Not really. Even in college, people forget Deshaun Hand was the number one recruit out of high school in 2014. A guy never really developed into necessarily a good player at either at the college or NFL level, but he's kind of an example of top 5-star guy out of high school really making a name for himself just from that pedigree, or he kind of just lived off of that pedigree. Now, and that sounds like I'm taking really a lot away from Deshaun Hand, but he still is a solid football player, but he never really has lived up to the hype of being that former number one overall recruit out of high school. And that's the thing, I think, as a person who follows high school football, college football, and the NFL, obviously, and even if you're a casual fan of football, you understand how that works. That just because a guy's the number one recruit out of high school or a 5-star guy doesn't mean he's going to go on to have a great college career and a great NFL career. It doesn't necessarily work like that. But Deshaun Hand, all the hype there was coming out of high school, and it just never really kind of resonated. It never really happened for him. Dolphins got Cam Smith too. Cam Smith was a 2nd-round pick a couple years ago. Neville Gallimore. Gallimore was a pretty high pick. I think he was a 2nd-rounder, one of the top defensive tackle prospects a few years ago. You look at the Dolphins receiving core, big notable names: Tyreek Hill, Odell Beckham, Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle becoming a name for himself. So yeah, you think of speed, you think of flash. So yeah, Tyreek Hill, Odell Beckham, yeah, it should be interesting. How many more years does Odell Beckham have as at least being a solid wide receiver, a guy that you can put out there and be a threat? I think is a question. Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, Isaiah Wynn, Aaron Brewer make up some of their offensive linemen. Yeah, that's the thing with the Dolphins. Just like, how many years is it going to be? They're just going to get by with a below average offensive line. I think you look at the Dolphins are. The Dolphins try to do what Ohio State football does. The Miami Dolphins kind of remind me of Ohio State. Like, Ohio State has gotten better at the line of scrimmage, but their whole thing was, let's have all these receivers, let's put up points, let's have a quarterback that can sling it around the yard. Not as much this year, but C.J. Stroud. The Dolphins trying to do that in the NFL. Now, the Dolphins have made an emphasis on the defensive line to be physical in that aspect when you're talking about their trenches, just like Ohio State. They've made an emphasis to be a good defensive line, but Ohio State's had a good offensive line, but and the Dolphins, though, even though their offensive line, even if you argue it's improved, they're still trying to push that identity too much of let's put up points and speed. You still have to, even if Mike McDaniel's offense, it's getting the ball out quickly, getting guys in space, just give the running back a little bit of a crease. You still need I feel like to win a Super Bowl, you need at least a good offensive line. Like the Kansas City Chiefs, you could argue this past year, was it necessarily a great offensive line? Was it an elite offensive line? No. But to say it was a good offensive line, I think that's really hard to argue against. I would say it certainly was a good offensive line at the very least, even if you want to argue it wasn't great or elite. So yeah, as much as the Dolphins, the flash, the sizzle, as much as you want to talk about that with the Miami Dolphins, they still need... You still could argue that their offensive line is not quite good enough to get them to a Super Bowl. Let's take a look at another team here. Let's go to rosters I like. We'll talk about the Houston Texans, because why not? Talked about the Houston Texans a lot. Good roster led by C.J. Stroud. Houston Texans. So if you want to compare some teams, the Chicago Bears could be what the Houston Texans are a few years from now. So if you look at the Chicago Bears, it's not you could argue a couple years ago it was a below average, bad. You could argue it was a bad roster, but quietly they added some pieces. Keenan Allen, even Rome Odunze this year. The hope is if Caleb Williams is an elite quarterback, the Bears could become like the Texans, a playoff team once again, a legit a contender in the division, and then maybe a Super Bowl contender. So yeah, Houston, you can argue, is a Super Bowl contender next year or this upcoming season. But yeah, the Texans are an example of how getting an elite quarterback just can clear up a lot of holes. You find a guy like, you can argue C.J. Stroud is not elite. You could make that case, but I think at the very least he's a very good quarterback. So yeah, C.J. Stroud is really made the future look a lot brighter and cleared up a lot of questions in Houston. But yeah, Texans, good offensive line led by Laramie Tussle. Receiver, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. Nico Collins, a guy that seems to get better every year. Stephon Diggs, a good football player. Will Anderson, too. Hopefully you get a little bit more out of him. Christian Harris has developed into a good linebacker. Derek Stingley had a nice season, looking like the top 3 pick, or at least showing at least the potential that he can live up to that. You got Jeff Okudah, Jalen Petrie. Petrie been a nice player at safety. Kamari Lassiter was the corner they drafted out of Georgia. Lassiter, they're going to project him to play in the nickel. Did pick up C.J. Henderson, a guy who just has not lived up to his first round pedigree. Kalen Bullock, safety out of USC. Bullock, he's got some ability too. I think he has a chance to play next year. Cade Stover, one of my favorite free agency signings. They got Ladarius Henderson. Cade Stover, good tight end out of Ohio State. Yeah, let's talk about the Denver Broncos. Denver Broncos, certainly an interesting team. I mean, you look at my issue with the Denver Broncos, like if you want to talk about, I guess you want to use the term strange. The term strange really fits with the Denver Broncos because, like if you look at their draft, I want to pull this up. Let's look at the Denver Broncos draft history. Like, for example, they've made some, like Courtland Sutton has been they invested a lot of capital in drafting receivers, right? Courtland Sutton was a good pick. Jerry Jeudy was a pretty good, you could argue that the Jerry Jeudy pick didn't work out. But like Courtland Sutton's an example of like a case where they've made a good pick, but then he's had injuries. And then Jerry Jeudy, it seemed like everyone's like, oh yeah, because a lot of people, he was at the time the consensus number receiver. So a lot of people thought that pick would really work out for him. Pick hasn't really worked out for him. So the Denver Broncos just like made some good picks, some bad picks, and then they've had some misses, but like, for example, like this year kind of really shows what I'm talking about with the Broncos. Like they take Bo Nix first round, and you're thinking like, yeah, they could use a quarterback. Like quarterback makes a lot of sense. But then again, like you could argue Bo Nix is like the 3rd, 4th best quarterback in this draft. So, and then the odds of getting a quarterback in the first round that it really works out. So there's just like there's a lot of reason to back that up, but there's also reason for skepticism of that pick. And then like the move, like getting Zach Wilson too. Like Zach Wilson, obviously former number 2 overall pick, but yeah, just is not really played well. Jonah Ellis, defensive end, Troy Franklin, Chris Abrams-Drain, Audric Estime, Devon Valley, and then Nick Garagula. So yeah, I mean, Troy Franklin and Bo Nix could really work out for him. Bo Nix, Troy Franklin both played together at Oregon. That could really be a strong connection if Bo Nix really becomes the player we think. But like last year, like last year with it's too many guys. Like they haven't really swung for the fence on a lot of picks. I think is what's hurting the Broncos. They've taken a lot of guys that you could argue are just like safe picks. Like last year's draft, for example, second round Marvin Mims, third round Drew Sanders. Now you could argue Drew Sanders had some upside, but I think a lot of people were like, yeah, he's a linebacker, but he just doesn't really play like reckless enough. So yeah, Drew Sanders, and he just didn't. Drew Sanders. It was a lot of good, but there wasn't like a lot of like eye-popping traits with Drew Sanders, except arguably with a couple of his movement skill, like lateral movement, stuff like that. And then with Marvin Mims, I think was a guy like him and Drew Sanders were both the same kind of guys. I both graded them around like 75 grade, which is like an above average grade. And there were some things to like Marvin Mims has the ability, like in a straight line, he can stretch the field vertically. He can win some deep balls. Like that's kind of his forte. That's his forte. And then with Drew Sanders, big athletic linebacker, former 5-star guy, good athlete. So that's what he hung his hat on. So they both had things to hang their hat on, but I don't think there was a lot of upside with him. And then Riley Moss too. Riley Moss, sure, he had a nice career at Iowa, but there was just not a lot of hype from him. J.L. Skinner was a safety some people liked, and then Alex Forsyth, some people liked, but I mean, it's in the 7th round. You're kind of at that point. It's there's not a lot of like. I don't think Forsyth was a guy that, except I heard other than one guy. There's one guy I heard. I forget the guy's name, but he was the one that had high hopes for Forsyth. But once again, 7th round guy, Then you look at like here 2021 as they finally got like Patrick Surtain. But even Surtain, people a lot of thought was like he was kind of too like it was more of like a safe thing, but it turns out Surtain was not just a high floor, he was also a high ceiling guy. So best of both worlds with Patrick Surtain. But even like 2022, like Nick Bonito, Greg Dulcich, it's interesting. Yeah, the Broncos, it's kind of like they're almost like the Broncos drafting kind of reminds you of like the guy who's playing it safe at the casino. Like maybe he walks out ahead. Maybe like it's like the guy that goes. The Broncos drafting is kind of like the guy that goes into the casino with $100 and he walks out with like 110, 120. You're coming out ahead, but like, are you really getting like think about if and the guy spent like 3-4 hours. Like, is that a good use of your time? And I know I'm comparing their draft. It's kind of goofy comparing their drafting to playing to going to the casino, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Like it's just like it's playing it safe. There's it's too many like it's too much playing it safe. Sometimes you got to take some swings for the fences. And then here's 2020. You take back-to-back receivers, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. Neither of those guys worked out. Jeudy, you could argue, yeah, he had a few decent seasons, but he did not get a second contract with him. Noah Fant was a nice pick, but he's no longer with the team. So yeah, and that's what's weird. Some of their best picks, the guys that are no longer with the team, and then Nick Bonito. I don't know how Nick Bonito performed this year. Was he hurt? I thought Bonito would be good, but just I don't know. It's just to the Broncos, too much playing it safe. Not a lot of upside picks, and it's really shown in the performance of this team, just not winning enough games. It's the thing, the way the NFL is structured, you have to take some risks. Like you can't really just play it, because the rosters are so even. Like you look at there's no roster is just like completely dominant. Like even if you want to argue like the Niners are the best roster in football because that's the best roster ever, but they just like you look at them top to bottom, it's not like damn like insane. Like the defense is kind of really anchored by Fred Warner, Nick Bosa. Like the 49, obviously you can't do this, but if you want to play this, like if you take away that, like next year hypothetically, if the Niners didn't have Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, how like that could. They still are so well coached. They'd probably be a good defense, solid defense, but that would really make a huge difference. Like that would probably be a huge deciding factor in at least 3 or 4 games. Like they'd probably lose 3 or 4 more games, even if it was a playoff team. So Just goes to show that, like, yeah, bottom line, I guess I'm giving you the long answer for difference makers are important, and making swings and taking risks in the NFL draft is important. We'll talk the Detroit Lions, a team that I know pretty well. I'm obviously a fan of the Lions, so I don't want to talk them too much. I want to spend time talking about other teams. But yeah, so let's break down the Lions roster. I'm comfortable with them. I'm confident in talking about them. So yeah, we'll start with the wide receiver position with the Detroit Lions. Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, St. Brown. Jameson Williams, Jameson Williams has been certainly, you want to talk about, I don't know if I want to use the word frustrating, but let's use the term interesting with Jameson Williams. So Jameson Williams has given the Lions some big plays in end arounds and some big play receptions. But the problem, Jameson Williams and St. Brown, it's kind of funny. They're ironic that they're on the same team because they're both kind of different guys. Like St. Brown, this guy who's any given game could get you like 6, 7, 8 catches, 100 yards. Jameson Williams, it might be a game where it's one catch, 10 yards, but then the next game he's got 2 rushes, 60 yards, a touchdown, a bit, and then one catch to go along with one catch, 50 yards. So I guess what I'm getting at, Amon-Ra St. Brown, more the guy you can count on to get you several catches in a game, maybe a touchdown, and then Jameson Williams, a big play, explosive threat, but he may have a couple games in a season where he's just kind of non-existent. So I guess Jameson Williams is, you kind of have to live with the ups and the highs and lows, if you will, with him. But yeah, Jameson Williams certainly shown some big play flash ability. Khalif Raymond, too, has been a nice player, shows a ability in special teams. Antoine Green, Donovan Peoples-Jones. The offensive line, Taylor Decker, Graham Glasgow, Frank Ragnow at center, Kevin Zeitler they got from Baltimore. Yeah, it makes sense. Brad Holmes, when he said that he felt comfortable they could line up and play tomorrow if they needed to, referring to their offensive line, that's how I knew they weren't going to invest a lot of capital in the draft of the offensive line. Now, they did take Giovanni Manu, the guy from British Columbia. So, yeah, I was pretty certain they were not going to invest. They were not going to take, draft 2 or 3 guys after he said that he felt comfortable they could line up and play tomorrow on the offensive line. And yeah, still have Dan Skipper. Cody Sorsdale will enter his second year. He did some nice things, too. No more Jonah Jackson, too. Jonah Jackson no longer with the team. Jonah Jackson was a good player for him, but just had injuries. But yeah, Penei Sewell, Kevin Zeitler. Sewell, an absolute stud, got paid. Tight end, Sam Laporta, Brock Wright, James Mitchell. Quietly, the Lions have pretty good depth at tight end. Sam Laporta, the notable name for them at tight end. But yeah, Brock Wright has some ability. James Mitchell has some ability. Nice running back combo. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. On the defense, Marcus Davenport, DJ Reader, Aleem McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson, Anzalone, Derek Barnes. Signed Carlton Davis, Terrion Arnold, and then Brian Branch. Yeah, Terrion Arnold was their first-round pick. Ennis Rakestraw, projected to be the backup nickel right now. He was their second-round pick, corner out of Missouri. Brian Branch had a nice rookie year. Derek Barnes has been solid. He's had some flash plays, including the interception against Tampa Bay. Then you look at Carlton Davis, the free agent signing. Aiden Hutchinson been very good. Aleem McNeil been good. Marcus Davenport, the free agent signing. It's just kind of get them another edge rusher. Davenport, I have to look at his stats. I don't think he's ever had more than 8.5 sacks. People forget he was a first-round pick, but he has a lot of ability too, and he should be a nice player for this Detroit Lions defense. Look at the Seattle Seahawks. So Seattle, one of the best head coaching hires, getting Mike Macdonald. Mike Macdonald, if you remember, started his career at Michigan, defensive coordinator in 2021, did an excellent job there, was actually initially with Baltimore, went to Michigan, and then went back to Baltimore after the 2021 season in Michigan, and then turned Baltimore into one of the top defenses in the NFL the last couple of years. So one of the best, you could argue the best head coaching hire of any. was the Seattle Seahawks getting Mike Macdonald. So, yeah, Mike Macdonald, a tremendous coach, a guy that knows a lot about football, studied summa cum laude, which is football intelligence, in college, coached at the University of Georgia in 2010, was a grad assistant for Mark Richt. So, yeah, Mike Macdonald, a good football mind, a hardworking coach, very worthy of getting this head coaching position. Wide receiver, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, been there for a while. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Charles Cross on the offensive line. Cross been a good left tackle. Laken Tomlinson, a veteran guy. Oluwatimi, center out of Michigan a couple years ago, has been a nice player. Christian Hayes was a draft pick I really liked. Right guard projected to be their starting right guard. He was out of UConn. It was a player I watched his tape late, but I liked his ability. He's got some aggression. He's got some strength. Run blocking, at least in my opinion, was his most notable strength. Abram Lucas, too, at the right tackle position. Tight end Noah Fant. So, yeah, outside of quarterbacks, Seattle is just a rock-solid roster. Devin Witherspoon and then Byron Murphy. Like, you look at Seattle, Byron Murphy and Devin Witherspoon could be anchoring this defense. Like how when you reference the San Francisco 49ers, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, the elite difference makers, with Seattle, maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now, a lot of people will associate Seattle with Devin Witherspoon, Byron Murphy, two elite difference makers. Like when Seattle won a Super Bowl, a lot of people were referencing Seattle with Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, like elite difference makers defensively. That's what I think Devin Witherspoon and Byron Murphy could be. You talk about, like, this is such a, like, you think Mike Macdonald at Michigan, Mike Macdonald in Baltimore. Like, Mike Macdonald, knowing that he coached under both John and Jim Harbaugh, guys that emphasized the line of scrimmage and physical football, this was such a draft. Knowing that, this was such a draft that would be stereotypical of Mike Macdonald, because you addressed Christian Hayes, you get a physical, aggressive offensive lineman. Byron Murphy, you get a strong, physical defensive lineman. So a draft very indicative of Mike Macdonald's core beliefs, and especially knowing that Mike Macdonald values defense and he values physicalness, being physical at the line of scrimmage. You understand this is this would be a typical, this is what you certainly should expect from Mike Macdonald. Derek Hall, too, is a guy they drafted a couple years ago. Jaron Reed, the guy that's been there for a while at nose tackle. Draymond Jones, Boye Mafe. Mafe, a speed edge rusher. I didn't really like coming out, but he's at least been solid for him. Guy that just has a natural feel for rushing the passer. And then Leonard Williams, a veteran guy, too, got some strength, power. That's kind of been his identity. Strength at the point of attack, good against the run, had some nice years in New York. That's really what Leonard Williams has made a living on. And then Jackson Smith-Njigba. Does Smith-Njigba break out this year? Smith-Njigba just seems like a guy who he's just going to get, it's going to click. Like Smith-Njigba, understanding his skill set, he seems like a guy that would really thrive in like year 2, year 3. This is a guy that it clicked at the high school level, it clicked at the college level, even not necessarily being the fastest, best burst, quickest guy. This guy that just has a understanding of how to manipulate defensive backs and get open in good hands and play fast. So yeah, Smith-Njigba, certainly a guy that could have a really big-time breakout season. So, yeah, I like the Seattle Seahawks roster. I think there's a lot. Like, if you're Mike Macdonald, you got to be like, there's a lot to work with on this Seattle roster. Michael Jackson, too, one of the more underrated players in the NFL. Now, he's not necessarily a shutdown elite corner household name, but certainly a lot of ability. I know Pete Carroll would always talk about him, and his play really shows up. Kind of reminds me of the guy for the Cowboys. I'll pull up the Cowboys roster next. Who's that the safety for the Cowboys that, like, I watch and he plays really well for them? Like, there's some guys like that. They're just people, a lot, like, if you're a casual NFL fan, you don't know his name, but you watch him play and he plays at a high level. Who was I thinking of with the Cowboys? But we're on the Cowboys anyway, so we'll talk the Cowboys. So, yeah, I mean, same kind of thing with the Dallas Cowboys is Seattle. Or the Dallas Cowboys roster, Like, you got to give Jerry Jones credit. It's always at the very least, the Cowboys always have at least a solid roster. DeMarcus Lawrence, veteran guy at defensive end, good player. Mozzie Smith, a guy they drafted a couple years ago out of Michigan. Mozzie Smith, an athletic guy. I don't think he'll ever become a dominant nose tackle, but a guy with athletic ability, good, solid football player. Also at Diggy Zua. Micah Parsons, what is there to say that hasn't been said about Micah Parsons? Stud, beast, monster, can rush the passer. Now playing true defensive end. Yeah, Micah Parsons doing exactly what the Cowboys want him to do. Get sacks, double-digit sacks, be dominant, be a freak, show versatility, which he did early in his career. Now they're playing him more as just a true rush defensive end, but he showed the versatility to, like in his rookie year, be the top. Oh, we'll play you at linebacker, be the top graded linebacker. Oh, we'll play you at defensive end, be the top graded defensive end. So yeah, that's all Micah Parsons has done. Be versatile, be dominant, exactly what the Dallas Cowboys drafted him for. Damone Clark too. Damone Clark was an interesting guy at LSU. Had an injury a couple years ago. Looks like he's fully healed from that. But yeah, Clark, an athletic linebacker, like so many linebackers that have come from LSU. Athletic, tough, physical, strong, with upside. So yeah, Clark, Kendricks projected to be the linebacker. Still got Trevon Diggs, a good player. Malik Hooker, talented safety too. Deron Bland, Jordan Lewis. Jordan Lewis has been there for several years now. Pretty nice receiving core. CD Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Tyler Guyton. And then the offensive line, they've really worked to rebuild. Tyler Smith, Zach Martin, Terrence Steele, and then Jake Ferguson at tight end. Ezekiel Elliott back at running back, and then Dak Prescott at quarterback. We'll take a look at the New York Jets for a minute. Actually, I want to look at the Las Vegas Raiders. Take a look. We'll talk. I want to talk the Raiders for a minute. So I think the Raiders getting Brock Bowers was an interesting pick. Interesting in the sense that the Raiders have other needs. Like the defensive line, certainly a need. I know they did in last year's draft, they addressed that with Tyree Wilson, and then in free agency they got Christian Wilkins. But, well, actually I retract that. The defensive line's good, but they had definitely a need at linebacker. A need in this. They've had needs the last couple years in the secondary. But I think the Brock Powers pick was like, okay, we got Michael. We invested capital in getting a tight end last year, but this guy is just such a freak. That's not pass him up at this spot. Let's get an elite difference maker, even if it's not necessarily a huge glaring need. So I think what I'm getting at, the pick of Brock Bowers was, even though tight end wasn't high on their list of needs, I think it was a pick where that's not pass him up at this position. And that's get us a true difference maker. I think that's what their thought process with Brock Bowers was. Jackson, like the Raiders, you talk about a couple of my favorite first and second round picks. Brock Bowers, first round, Jackson Powers Johnson, the second round. Those are two really good picks. And then the secondary or offensive line still got Colton Miller at left tackle. Yeah, Parham's been a nice player at guard. So, yeah, you look at the Raiders' offensive line is going to be solid. At the very least, it's going to be solid. This is not going to be a bad offensive line. And then, yeah, Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Tyree Wilson. They could be strong in the defensive line. You got to keep those guys healthy because there's not a lot of depth behind them. But, yeah, it looks good on paper. Max Crosby, Wilkins, Tyree Wilson. I'm really rooting for Tyree Wilson. I love Tyree Wilson coming out. He needs to show a little bit more in year two. I was annoyed they weren't getting him a lot of snaps, especially when McDaniels was there. But, yeah, he needs to show some more ability. But, yeah, sticking with the Las Vegas Raiders. Divine Diablo to a linebacker. He hasn't really been great. They took Tommy Eichenberg, I like Tommy Eichenberg, and I made the mistake of, like, Eichenberg slipped. He was projected by some to be the top linebacker in this NFL draft. I didn't go back and reevaluate Tommy Eichenberg. He didn't have as good a season, but this is a guy you got to kind of take him not having this as good a season this year with a grain of salt, just because the guy played through injuries the last several years at Ohio State. One of the toughest guys on the Ohio State roster. Just a very tough football player. 2 broken thumbs he played through. So, yeah, I should have reevaluated. But I guess the bottom line is I like Tommy Eichenberg. Does he necessarily give you a lot of ups? Like, is he the freakiest athletic linebacker as far as from a movement skills perspective? No. But if you want to talk about toughness, ability to take on blocks, stop the run, in good enough, at least adequate, or at least solid ability and coverage, those are all things that you can really pencil in for Tom to say about Tommy Eichenberg. Jack Jones too. Trevon Merrick's been solid. Nate Hobbs has been a good nickelback. But yeah, I think what's frustrating about the Las Vegas Raiders, and I kind of laugh saying it's just like they've invested a lot of capital in the secondary, but it hasn't really paid off. It hasn't paid dividends for them. Like, look at the 1 year they took like 3 safeties. So I forget which draft that was. That was the draft they took Merrick, Diablo. Well, turns out they're going to play Diablo now at linebacker, but they took Merrick, Diablo. They took another safety. I don't even think he's with the team. They took Christopher Smith last year. Nate Hobbs has been the guy that's worked out at nickel, and I think Hobbs is Hobbs is like a late round pick. So the problem with the Raiders is they've invested a lot of capital in the secondary, but it hasn't paid off in return. But yeah, the offensive line, though, the Raiders have gotten lucky with the offensive line. Like Colton Miller has worked out. Colton Miller, a good football player. Dylan Parham, been solid. Thayer Mumford, solid. And then Jackson Powers Johnson, guy that's a lot going to be aggressive, physical, tough player, can play center or guard. So yeah, even though they haven't really invested a lot of capital in the offense, they've gotten lucky in that sense where sometimes to have a good offensive line in the NFL, you have to invest a lot in. Like the perfect example was the Cowboys years ago. Tyrone Smith, Zach Martin. Cowboys invested heavy in the offensive line. It paid dividends. Raiders have not invested necessarily heavy in the offensive line, but in the players they have drafted and they've invested in, it has worked out. So, yeah. Like, for example, Colton Miller. Like, if Colton Miller was a bust, I feel like that would really hurt because Colton Miller is such a staple at left tackle. Like, remember the one guy from Alabama, Leatherwood did not work out, but they've been able to make up for it. Like with Parham, what was Parham, like a 3rd or 4th round pick? So they've been able to make up for it in that sense. But yeah, it's really disappointing that that Leatherwood didn't work out. Because could you imagine the Raiders if Leatherwood had worked out? Now you can play Jackson Powers Johnson at center, Leatherwood at guard. And then, you could be talking about the Raiders potentially being a top 5 offensive line. Now, that's a big if because Leatherwood was just you argue, was a complete bust. But potentially, if that pick had worked out, and I use the term if with that because Leatherwood was a first round, wasn't he Leatherwood was a first round pick. So that's why I use the term if, because a lot of times first round picks work out. So potentially the Raiders could be a top offensive line, but this could be at least a top 15, I would say this is probably a top 10 offensive line. That may be a stretch, but I certainly could see it happening. Zamir White, Alexander Madison, Amir Abdullah, some of their running backs. Yeah, it's kind of all I wanted to say about the Raiders. We'll talk the Indianapolis Colts. I don't talk the Indianapolis Colts a lot. The Colts, though, quietly a rock-solid roster. I mean, you want to talk about who's good on the Indianapolis Colts. Quentin Nelson, a good football player at left guard. Michael Pittman, a good wide receiver. Anthony Richardson, a good quarterback. Anthony Richardson could be a good quarterback. Jonathan Taylor is a good running back. DeForest Buckner, a good player. Laiatu Latu, the rookie, could be a really good player. So, yeah. You look at the Colts, at least, like the Colts are... Like, with the Colts roster, Like if someone were to say the Colts will be good next year, there's enough evidence here to back that up. But also the issue with the Colts are if, like say example, they had a couple of their key guys go down. You could argue, like if someone told me a couple of their key guys went down and they didn't have as good a season, I could totally see that. So I guess the thing with the Colts is the Colts are one of those rosters where you could either see them having a good season or like the Colts, like to say they're going to be average or good, I think is very fair to say about the Indianapolis Colts. Like they'll probably be either average or good. Like I guess mainly what I'm getting at with the Indianapolis Colts is, do I think this is a Super Bowl contender next year? No. But do I see them being a bad roster? Like, do I see them being like 3-4 wins or less? No. So the Colts somewhere in between average and good. You could argue that's just above average, but then you could argue it. So I think they'll either be average, above average, or good. Now that's kind of a wide range, but honestly, there's a lot of teams that kind of fall into that same thing. Like I think the Buccaneers are kind of one of those teams like that. Like I remember people like Brett Coleman was talking about this. A lot of teams are just kind of in purgatory in the NFL. You could argue the Browns are another team like the Browns, Colts, Buccaneers. The Browns and Colts are both similar rosters. Like the Browns are really anchored. Like at least they can. The Browns understand that even if they're not great, even if this is like even if the Browns fans, like if someone were to tell the Browns fan, like if we saw in the future that the Browns didn't win the Super Bowl next year, like if Browns fans heard that, they'd be like, yeah, I could see it. But at least, I don't know, I'm a fan of it almost sure things. You could argue in life there's no such thing as a sure thing, but at least on defense, you can go out to the field with Myles Garrett walking onto the field. Like having Myles Garrett is at least that's a huge asset. Having Denzel Ward, a huge asset. Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Jedrick Wills, Joel Bitonio. Good offensive line. Denzel Ward, they got signed Devin Bush. Devin Bush just outside of his rookie year has not been the same guy after the ACL injury. Grant Delpit, Juwan Thornhill, Martin Everson, Greg Newsome, Owusu Karamoa. Yeah, the problem with the Bears is like there's a lot of solid players on the defense. Like Grant Delpit, solid player. Greg Newsome, solid football player. Zadarius Smith, solid football player. Delvin Tomlinson, solid football player. A lot of solid players, but you could argue Denzel Ward and Myles Garrett are the only very good football players on their defense. And then on the offense, like, you could argue Jack Conklin, Wyatt Teller are their only good players on offense. And Nick Chubb. But then you could argue maybe Deshaun Watson, but that's still a maybe. Like, Watson still does not quite look like the guy from a few years ago. Try to talk some teams we haven't really talked about. Let's talk the Washington Commanders. Haven't really talked Washington a whole lot. So I mean, with Washington, Terry McLaurin, a good player. Luke McCaffrey, get Christian McCaffrey's younger brother. Samuel Cosby been good in the offensive line. The offensive line might not be very good. I think that's the issue with Washington. Terry McLaurin's a good player. You got Austin Eckler at running back. Eckler's a good player. They did have a good draft, though, Washington. Mike Sanders still, Jerzon Newton, both really good football players. Be interesting to see how much of an impact both those guys make next year. Sanders still had a nice career at Michigan, former wide receiver. Jerzon Newton, considered one of the top defensive tackles in the 2024 NFL draft, and some people liked him number one. I had him up there. I eventually went with Byron Murphy number one, but I think Newton would have been my number two. So you look at, they got a good nickel corner, and you got a guy who was arguably the best defensive tackle in the draft. You're able to draft both those guys, which is a huge win. You're able to get a potential elite quarterback with elite running ability. So, yeah, that's what I argued with Washington. You talk about, there's a lot of teams that had some of my favorite first and second round picks. You could argue Washington had the best 1, 2, 3 round picks, the best 3 picks in a row. Getting Jane Daniels first, Newton second, and then Mike Sanders still third. So, yeah, Washington, really nice picks. Jeremy Chin from Carolina, too, at safety. Veteran Bobby Wagner. At least they have Daron Payne. Daron Payne at defensive tackles an animal. Jonathan Allen, been a good player too. Yeah, at least with Washington, they can really hang their hat that they have Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen. So that's key. Cleveland Farrell. Farrell it just hasn't worked out in the NFL for him. If you remember, Farrell was a top 5 pick, 4th overall pick by the Las Vegas Raiders back in 2019. And then, yeah, I was hoping Jamin Davis would be a better player. He was a linebacker people liked a few years ago coming out. An athletic guy, just has not really played at a high level for him. Take a look at the New York Giants. Yeah, Giants, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Jordan Phillips, Kayvon Thibodeau makes out their defensive line. Hopefully Thibodeau has a better season. I like Kayvon Thibodeau. Still a fan. You want to see more from him. I say that. I got to retry. Man, I guess I'm a little clueless here. I guess I didn't realize Thibodeau did have 11.5 sacks this year. But I think why a lot of people liked Kayvon Thibodeau, the guy is just a fierce alpha competitor. You know, some guy, I think, is Kayvon Thibodeau, like if you talk about some of the freakiest edge rushers, like is Kayvon Thibodeau like necessarily a freaky athletic edge rusher? But he is a guy that I would say the answer to that is no, but he is a guy he just competes. Whether it's high school, college, this guy is just a fierce competitor. And he knows how to rush the passer. And he has a feel for when to use certain moves. He's got an arsenal of different moves. So, yeah, Kayvon Thibodeau, good football player. Tyler Nubin was a safety they drafted out of Minnesota. Nubin seen as a consensus number 1 safety. Drew Phillips. Still got Deonte Banks at corner. Wan'Dale Robinson, Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton at wide receiver. And then, yeah, their offensive line just slowly getting better over time. John Michael Schmitz at center was the guy they drafted last year. Evan Neal, John Runyon, Devin Singletary at running back, Eric Gray. So, yeah, I mean, Giants a good roster overall. Don't necessarily love it. But, yeah, there's certainly some things to like about the New York Giants roster. And a roster kind of like, I guess you'd throw them in there with like we'll throw them in there with like the Browns roster, in the Colts roster. It's, it's good, solid, but it's not like you're not like wowed away. Look at the New England Patriots. We'll start top to bottom here. So look at the wide receiver position with the New England. Jalen Polk, rookie receiver they drafted out of Washington. Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas. Kendrick Bourne's been okay. Got KJ Osborne from Minnesota. Chukwuma Okorafor from Pittsburgh. Okorafor has been a nice player. I'm surprised Pittsburgh let him go. Cole Strange at left guard is a guy they drafted a couple years back. He was a first-round guy. David Andrews, Sidney So at right guard. Mike Owenu at right tackle. And then you got Hunter Henry at tight end, so that kind of shapes out. And then Jacoby Brissett or Drake May. Drake May, the rookie they drafted. So, yeah. Drake May, a chance to start. Got to make it chance to make an impact. Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson at running back. Stevenson, been a nice physical running back for New England. Keon White, Devon Godshaw. On the defensive line out for New England, Keon White, Devon Godshaw, Christian Barmore, Matthew Judon. Yeah, Keon White's been good. Or White was a player I like coming out of Georgia Tech. Godshaw, been a nice player. Barmore, been good. Matt Judon's been okay. Or Matt Judon's been good. Juwan Bentley, Jelani Tavai. There's a lot of good in the New England Patriots defense, but it's more so just one of those where it's kind of just a collection of solid good players, and it's a collection. It's all adds up to a good defense. Like, I don't think New England will be an elite defense, but like at least like you look at it and you're just like it's just rock solid overall. Kyle Duggar at safety, guy that'll come up and hit you. Christian Gonzalez, a guy who has some upside at corner. So yeah, a few guys with some upside. Like Gonzalez, hopefully he takes another step, and then yeah, Keon White should be rock solid for him. Barmore good. So yeah, I mean it should be a good defense for New England. Maybe not necessarily an elite defense. Look at the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, I mean, Philadelphia could be strong once again at wide receiver. Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Johnny Wilson was a rookie they got. Will be a rookie out of Florida State. Guy with some size, 6'6", 6'7". I forget what he officially measured in, but he's got some height to him. Strong offensive line once again. Mulata at left tackle. Dickerson at left guard. Juergens at center. Tyler Steen at right guard. I like Tyler Steen coming out, and he's been a nice starter for them too. I liked his tape at Alabama. Lane Johnson at right tackle. Lane Johnson, a veteran offensive lineman. Dallas Goedert. Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley make up the quarterback running back. Saquon Barkley, a good free agent acquisition. And then, yeah, defensively, Milton Williams, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter on the defensive line. So, yeah, it should be a strong unit. Hopefully Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter just keep getting better, playing more snaps and playing at a high level for them. And then, yeah, linebacker, Nakobe Dean, Devin White. Yeah, Howie Roseman, you got to love about Howie Roseman, he's just obsessed with getting good talent, strong physical players, athletes. He just is a psycho about making this roster better. That's what he talks about, just a psychopathic mindset of improving this football team. Like, you have a need at corner. Oh, yeah, all we do is go out and at pick 19 get the best corner, or at least the best corner in most people's eyes, in Quinyon Mitchell. And then Jeremiah Trotter, too, at linebacker. Cooper DeJean at nickelback. C.J. Gardner-Johnson returns. You got Darius Slay. So, yeah, I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles, I think if you want to talk top to bottom, the Philadelphia Eagles may be the best roster. We'll see how it all pans out. But if you want to talk about no glaring weaknesses, best roster overall with all positions into consideration, I think the Philadelphia Eagles certainly are a candidate for that award. But yeah, just because you have the best roster on paper, that doesn't mean it's gonna work out in winning a Super Bowl. But yeah, as far as on paper, and there's certainly some things to like Ainias Smith too. Like even go out and get Will Shipley undrafted. Like they're always, you got to respect, the Eagles are always taking swings. Like, and even getting Jeremiah Trotter, I forget, was Trotter, what was he, 5th round? Does that mean 5th round? Like, that's the thing. Even if, like, you want to argue, like, Jeremiah Trotter is just an old school run-stuffing linebacker, that's kind of the way he plays. Even if that's just his role, like, okay, he's good at it. Like, I think that's what's cool about Howie Roseman. He's not necessarily just infatuated with all-around freak athlete football players. Like, for example, like they took Cooper DeJean. Some people saw Cooper DeJean as a corner, more as a safety. I think the bottom line with Cooper DeJean is, whatever he is, he's an athlete. He's an athletic guy. He's just got a good high football intelligence the way he plays. And then even with Quinyon Mitchell, I push back against him. I'm like, I love his traits, but I just don't, I question a little bit, could he be elite? But then Howie Roseman thinking, look at the traits on this guy. So I guess what I like about Howie Roseman, I think he thinks, look at the good things in each guy and don't overthink it. I think that's just Howie Roseman's mindset. Like with Will Shipley, for example, like them getting Will Shipley, like I think a lot of people are like, yeah, Will Shipley, some people liked it. Like he's a 5-star running back, but doesn't have the traits to be an elite all-around running back. But I think Howie Roseman's thinking, like, former 5-star guy, I'm sure they interviewed him. He's a great guy, very well-spoken guy, hardworking. So you think, I just love that Howie Roseman just is not overthinking this. And then even Trevor Keegan, too. Keegan, a veteran offensive lineman from Michigan, too, part of Michigan's success in the offensive line. So I just love that Howie Roseman drafts a lot of guys, and he just sees the pot. Like, he drafts guys who have question marks, not question marks off the field, but question marks that could prevent them from becoming an elite football player. But he takes guys that the positives are right there, are you can see them. So yeah, I think Jeremiah Trotter is an example of a pick where it's like, Trotter may not become like. Are you going to ask Jeremiah Trotter to go out and be an outstanding coverage linebacker is asking a lot, but can you count on him to stop the run, take on offensive line, take on blocks, get off blocks? Can you count on that from Jeremiah Trotter? Absolutely. And then with Devin White too. Like they signed Devin White. Like Devin White just has not played as well the last couple seasons, but Devin White he's a freak as far as athletically. So yeah. I love that Howie Roseman sees the best. Howie Roseman scouts the way you're supposed to. Look at the positives in players. And bank on that the positives are really going to shine for that player. So I want to look at I was going to go to the Bill. I want to look at the New York Jets for a minute. Might have time to look at the Bills as well. Shoot, the Jets. Of course, the Jets doesn't come up when I click on it. It's been coming up when I... Let's look at the New York Jets. So they made a nice pick. They got the offensive tackle from Penn State in the first round, Olu Fashanu. That was a pick I liked. Kind of just going off of memory right now until it loads. I got Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson at wide receiver, Tyrone Smith at tackle, Joe Tippmann, Aaron Rodgers, Breece Hall. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers. You hope that Aaron Rodgers is healthy on the football field for the New York Jets. I wanted to see Aaron Rodgers on the New York Jets this year. Like, I just wanted to see how it would play out in a team where, like, the New York Jets have had struggles for a long time. Like, I guess I just wanted to see the New York Jets with an elite quarterback. They just haven't had for so long, they just have kind of gotten by with just guys that just weren't that good. I just wanted to see them have an elite quarterback out there. And then, Jermaine Johnson, Quinnen Williams, one of the best defensive tackles in the National Football League. C.J. Mosley, Sauce Gardner, one of the best corners. So, things to like about the New York Jets. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, and hopefully that connection with Garrett Wilson will be strong. So those are all the hopes for the New York Jets, and hopefully the offensive line takes another step. So hopefully there's a strong connection between Aaron Rodgers and the Jets wide receivers. Hopefully this offensive line is improved, especially with guys like Tyrone Smith, Fashanu the rookie, Tippmann. So hopefully those things happen. And then, hopefully the defense is at least good. Like, there's certainly pieces for this defense to be good once again. Jermaine Johnson trending in the right direction. Quinnen Williams, a good defensive tackle. C.J. Mosley, a veteran linebacker. And then Sauce Gardner, a top 5 corner at the very least. Alrighty, so we'll take a quick look at the Buffalo Bills. Keon Coleman was their second round pick, was their first pick of the draft in the second round. Cole Bishop at safety too. I kind of like Cole Bishop. I think he's a good football player. Safety out of Utah. Ed Oliver, AJ Epinesa, Dwayne Carter. There's some of their defensive guys. Ed Oliver, they signed to a long-term deal. Still got Von Miller, Taylor Rapp. And then, offensive line should be pretty strong. Deion Dawkins kind of anchoring that offensive line. Osiris Torrance has been pretty solid. He was the guy they took a couple years ago. It was their second-round pick out of Florida. Big, strong, physical offensive lineman. James Cook, the speedster, a running back they have, and then Josh Allen, an elite quarterback. So, things to like. Concern, like the concern with the Buffalo Bills is, I think you can bank on the Buffalo Bills will be a good team. They'll be competitive next year, should have a winning record. But the question mark is this a Super Bowl contending team? Like, did the Bills get a lot better in this offseason? I think that's the question. So, but I'm going to wrap it that, guys. Thanks for tuning into the Brant Marshall Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.